Bajari Namai Darug Narawa. Good to see you on Darug Nand. Welcome everyone. Welcome to Elizabeth Farm. My name is Naomi and this is Sophie, and we both work for Sydney Living Museums.
Our museums and places are on Aboriginal land. As we walk together and tread gently on this country, we acknowledge the Burramattagal people of the Darug Nation and pay respects to the elders, past and present, and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We've got schools joining us today from across Australia with over 6,000 students. Now today we are on Darug Country, but we'd love to know what country you are on. If you know, type it into the Q&A for us now. You should find the Q&A in the bottom of your screen. You can open that and type what country you're in, if you know.
Let's have a look at answered questions. Oh yeah, Darawal land.
Bidjigal,
Darug
Darug.
land, great. Awabakai, excellent. Awabakal.
Still a few more coming through. Wonderful, that's fantastic to have so many schools from so many different places to share our program with today.
So, of course, we are here at Elizabeth Farm. And Elizabeth Farm is near Parramatta in the western suburbs of Sydney. And we can see lots of you are in the western suburbs as well, all on Darug Country. So that is great. Now, Elizabeth Farm was built by John and Elizabeth MacArthur, and it is in fact the oldest colonial farm in Australia. Now look at this picture here on your screen. These are two portraits from the time over 220 years ago, and it's John and his wife Elizabeth MacArthur. Now today we have some of the land of the farm, about 1 football field of land, but back 220 years ago it was more like the size of 1,000 football fields, so it was a very, very large farm. Now let's have a look at what it looks like today. Of course today the MacArthurs don't live here. This is run by the New South Wales government as a house museum, and here is the house now with its beautiful orange walls. That's the veranda, and here are the gardens of Elizabeth Farm. The MacArthurs planted a lot of flowers and trees that look beautiful, but a lot of really useful vegetables as well. We'll talk more about that later.
So the MacArthurs built their house on the land of the Burramattagal here on Darug Country. So in today's program, what we're going to be doing is thinking about the importance of caring for country. We'll also think about how farms like this one, built by European settlers, changed the landscape and the way of life of the Burramattagal. To help us think about how we can all care for country, we'll be exploring a special artwork that's currently here at Elizabeth Farm by an Aboriginal artist. And you can see it behind me right now on your screens.
Now, throughout the program today, there's lots of ways you can interact with Sophie and myself. So down underneath me here, there's a Q&A, so you can type questions there, and we'll ask you to, at various times, put things into the Q&A, maybe answers, maybe questions. There are polls. We have Colleen behind the scenes. Sometimes she's going to put polls up and you get to vote. And of course, there's also your digital hands up that will show alongside your screen. So put your digital hands up right now, press on the reaction with the hand, and we will see if you are ready to go. Put your digital hands up now.
Lots and lots of hands shooting up there, I can see on my screen here. Excellent. They're all pretty excited, just like we are.
Excellent, yes. All right, so we had a question sent in from St Sava. Now, St Sava said, is this Darug land important to the Aboriginal people? Well, of course, that was a good question.
Very good question.
And of course it was. The Burramattagal people knew that this was a rich food bowl. There were many resources from both the land and from the Parramatta River and the other rivers, and they used these resources. We are going to cross to Uncle Fred, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the plants that were used by the Burramattagal people on Darug Country. Have a look at this now.
So g'day fellas, they call me Fred from Fred's Bush Tucker, and I'd like to acknowledge the people that are on this land and have been on this land since before time. Our elders past, present and future. And I've got a few things here that I'll demonstrate some plants, how you can use them as bush foods in your normal tucker anyway at home. A lot of stuff you can buy at the shopping markets these days, you can find in the bush. Because back in the day, before settlement, this place was our supermarket. If it wasn't here, we'd run out. We'd have to go somewhere else, which is why we didn't stay in one place for too long, so we could leave the place for the next person to come along and regenerate it. So for example, when I talk to kids, I ask them about types of flowers. So these are grevilleas, and if you've ever seen birds on grevilleas, and first thing in the morning, of course they're sucking out the juicy honey that's in them, the nectar. So we can do that same as well. When it's nice and dewy, you can just suck the nectar straight off it. Otherwise, you can put a few in your cooler on here, bit of water, let that soak for 10 minutes, and then you've got a nice flavoured cordial as well. And that'll just bring out all the flavours as well with it. So that's a pretty easy trick. This stuff's called Lomandra. There's a couple of wonderful things you can do with this plant. If you have a look down the bottom here, all nice and white. That means it's got lots of goodness in it. Starch, it's a bit like a raw potato. So you just have a bit of a chew on the end while you split him up. You can plait it, and what you can do with this is you can make baskets out of it, or some jewellery, or some holders, all the while getting a nice feed off the end of it. That tastes pretty good actually, and it's very, very, very strong. Makes it good for baskets. You can make eel traps out of it, all sorts of things out of just this one plant. The other thing with this plant, Lomandra, is it comes with these flower stems, and these are the green ones here, flower stem. You got to wait till they're dry like this, then you can shake all the seeds off. You need lots and lots, of course. Then you get your rock or your grinder, grind them all up, bit of water, and then you've got some dough for your dough bread. And that's a couple of uses just off one plant out in the bush or even on the side of the road. You'll find this stuff everywhere. I have some mint here, some river mint. You can put this all through cooking as well. Looks like mint, smells like mint. You can find it down the beach, up the bush, in your neighbour's garden most of the time. And same as, you tear the leaves off. Ooh, that's a good one. So it's all out there. We had to survive 60,000 years or longer somehow without the supermarkets these days. I reckon we did a pretty good job. So that's just a little bit of the plants I've got here to show you. So I hope you guys learnt something new out of this. There's a whole lot more to learn. I don't know it all, that's for sure. We're all still learning. An old elder said to me once, you have to give away your knowledge so you can keep it. And that's what I take away from this. You've got to give it away so you can keep it.
Thank you, Uncle Fred, for that really interesting show of the bush tucker plants. Now, what do you think that Uncle Fred meant when he said you have to give away knowledge so that you can keep it? That quote's up on your screen now. What do you think it means? You can put your suggestions into the Q&A. You have to give away knowledge so you can keep it.
Oh.
Have a little think in your class or at home. And then when you're ready, start typing those answers into the Q&A.
So we can see some raised hands there, and that's good, but you need to put it in the Q&A because we can't hear you, remember? Excellent.
So you have to give so you can learn more. That's one suggestion from WMPS Years 3 to 6.
Yes.
You have to share so it's not forgotten. That was from Chilligan Public School. That's a great thought.
I like this one. Pass it on so that it doesn't die out. That's a good message.
Yeah.
Importance of oral history.
So Pomona Public School said something similar as well. Those are all really, really great suggestions, and
So
I can
many
see
answers.
too many for us all to read through
Yeah,
right
love
now.
what you're thinking.
But great to see you thinking so carefully and deeply about that question.
But they're getting this message about the importance of sharing, pass it on to others. So many of you have said that. Well done.
Fantastic.
Well done.
Let's take a look now at some of the objects that can be made using resources from country, such as this burra trap. This is a burra trap or eel trap made using resources from the land used to catch eels, like you can see in the image on your screen at the moment. So an eel could swim inside and get stuck into the trap. Now, can you remember what plant Uncle Fred said could be used to make an eel trap like this one? Let's put a poll up on the screen with a few multiple choice answers. So was it the Banksia? Was it Lamandra, Grevillea, or River Mint? Lots of answers streaming through. I think they were listening all really carefully, Naomi.
95% are thinking. 85%.
Lots are saying the Lamandra. That was that long frondy plant. And they're absolutely right. It can be made with the Lamandra plant. You can see how on the eel trap, those fibers have been woven together to make that cylindrical or sort of circular shape to trap those eels. You could also use similar plants to make something like this basket here. This basket's been made as part of the artwork that's behind me at the moment by Aboriginal artists from different parts of Australia.
Also using those plant materials.
Absolutely. Thinking about that eel trap again and eels as a natural resource. The name Burramattagal or Burramatta means place where the eels lie down. And that tells us that they were common in the area, eels were common, and that they were also important to the Burramattagal people. Now, plants and objects like these ones help us to understand the importance of country and the importance of caring for country. Country provides the things that you need, and if you care for it, it takes care of you as well. Now,
Arden Anglican School asked us a really good question, and they said, how did the Darug care for country? Now, Uncle Fred did touch on that, and we saw those really sustainable land management practices. So the Darug, for example, used Lamandra to make things like the eel trap or dilly bags, but they didn't take all the Lamandra, so it could still be there next year and could continue to reseed. Good question, Arden, thank you. Now, when Europeans like free settlers like John and Elizabeth MacArthur came to this landscape, the landscape changed. Let's have a look at a couple of historical sources from the time about how it changed. We're going to look at some European paintings. So let's have a look at this one first. This one is from Castle Hill and it was painted in 1806. Now I want you to talk to each other, maybe talk to the person next to you and have a look. How has the landscape changed? What can you see in this painting? And I want you to put your answers in the Q&A. So talk amongst yourself and put answers in the Q&A.
Look closely at the detail you could see in the painting. There's lots to observe in there.
What can you see? Put your answers in the Q&A. Sophie and I are looking and waiting.
I think they're all thinking and chatting in their classrooms. I can tell there's some good conversations going.
Oh, I can see some answers now. Excellent.
Chop down trees.
Yes, so many tree stumps. Excellent. Deforestation. Cutting
That's a good
down
word,
the bush.
deforestation.
Great word. Trees are being cleared. Grasses, different European grasses are being planted. Excellent answers.
Buildings, stumps of trees.
Houses, excellent. That's big changes. Katoomba Public School is having a look there. What did they say? less houses, fences, construction. Yeah, great answers.
Yeah, fantastic.
So the landscape changed a lot according to that painting of Castle Hill. Let's have a look at another painting. Now this one is of Elizabeth Farm, where Sophie and I are today. This is a really famous European artist, Joseph Lycett, and he painted this painting of Parramatta in 1825. What can you see here?
So talk to the person beside you again, have a chat and think about your answers.
Okay, yeah, so new European trees we're hearing, parklands, yeah.
It does look like a parkland, doesn't it? That's a good observation.
Not like the native Australian bush. Yeah, trees have been cleared. Great, great answers. Excellent answers.
So let's think about
thinking.
Yeah, should we think about those two paintings together now and
Good
do another
idea.
poll? So think about what you saw in both and the changes between those two paintings as well. We're going to put another poll on your screen now to consider more broadly how you think the landscape has been changed. So here it comes now. There's a few different answers to choose from. Is it the trees being cleared to make room for animals and crops? Is it that houses were being built from resources from the land like stone and wood? Is it the fences being built dividing up the land? Or is it all of the above? And I can see the answers streaming in already.
Got the idea here.
And I think we're all on the right track.
Excellent.
We're all saying all of the above. And of course, you are absolutely correct. It was all those different things. Now, this had a really significant impact on the lives and the way the land was being used by the Burramattagal. We're going to take a closer look now at Elizabeth Farm and one of the gardens with one of our museum gardeners, Anita. Now, as we look at that garden, we can think about how the land was being used differently by the MacArthur family. Let's go meet Anita now.
Welcome, Anita. Thank you for coming to talk to us today about this garden at Elizabeth Farm. So what is your job here at Elizabeth Farm?
I'm one of the gardeners on the Sydney Living Museum's gardening team.
And what part of the garden are we standing in now?
Right here is the Elizabeth Farm kitchen garden. And this shows us how the MacArthurs would have grown much of the food that their family and their servants would have eaten. Now, this is just a recreation. So the original garden would have been in a different part of the property.
And so how was that original garden 200 years ago different from this garden today?
Well, it was a long way away from the house and it was much bigger. It was full of vineyards and fruit trees, and in fact John MacArthur said we have a large garden of about 3 acres that is full of the most excellent vegetables. Now if you can imagine 2 school ovals, that's almost how much land was grown with vegetables.
That's huge.
It is huge.
Have a look at this, boys and girls. This is one of the original plans of the kitchen garden at Elizabeth Farm from 1844. So have a look. You can see a small square, which is the house. And then next to that, you can see a pattern of squares that marks out the different vegetable gardens. And alongside that, there's a row of trees. And then you can see there's an orchard. So it was definitely much bigger than how much land we have left here today. But I understand, Anita, even though it's smaller, you've actually planted the same sorts of plants they planted 200 years ago. How did you know what to plant?
Well, we know what a lot of the food that was grown here was because of the letters that Elizabeth MacArthur wrote. In one letter she said, "In our garden, which is very large, we have oranges and lemons and almonds and apricots and peaches and apples and pears," and the list just went on and on.
So you might recognise some of those fruits that Anita mentioned. Have a look around, Anita and I. What else do you recognise in this garden? If you have a close look, you can see the silver beet that we're standing right ahead of. You can see some cucumbers. You can see some bunches of celery. You can see some rhubarb. Maybe you know what rhubarb is. You can see along the sides interesting things like some black grapes. And even you can see a banana tree. Now, wonder what your favourite thing is in this garden. My favourite is this, the beautiful little cherry tomatoes that are in the garden. They're really delicious. What's your favourite, Anita?
Well, I like lemons because you can squeeze the juice on lots of different types of food and make them taste better. And also they're full of vitamin C, which is really great for your health.
Lemons are good. Of course, Mrs. MacArthur's favourite was the strawberries. So, these days, of course, if you want strawberries, tomatoes, lemons, you just buy them from the shops. But 200 years ago, the MacArthurs couldn't do that. In fact, the MacArthurs and other free settlers and farmers here in Parramatta grew much of the food for the rest of the colony. Now, when Mrs. MacArthur was choosing what to plant, Anita, did she plant any native Australian plants as well?
She did plant native Australian plants because she loved the way they looked next to the European plants that she would have had here. She loved them so much, in fact, she spent a lot of time learning their names.
Well, thank you, Anita, for coming today to talk to all of us, all the students out there about the original gardens here at Elizabeth Farm. Before we leave the garden though, let's go and have a look at one last mystery item. So here is our mystery object that's to do with the garden here at Elizabeth Farm. Now, this object is called a Wardian case. Let's have a close look at it. So, it's a case made out of wood, and there's a big plate of glass here at the front, and then there's a handle on this side and on the opposite side. And have a look at this. If I lift this section up, it's like a lid. The glass plate is like a lid. And inside we can see a plant, but in fact there could be about 10 plants squeezed in here. So what do you think this is? What do you think it was used for 200 years ago when the MacArthurs came out here to Elizabeth Farm? Well, welcome back. That was great to meet Anita from the gardening team, and she told us so much about the European plants that the MacArthurs brought here to Elizabeth Farm. But what did you think about the mystery object? Let's have a look at it again. It was, of course, a Wardian case. It was the Wardian case. What do you think it was used for? I've already got lots of ideas. Ada's saying a greenhouse. I can see that Hamish is saying a greenhouse. Okay, let's think a greenhouse. Let's put up a poll. You can see that now. These are your options. What do you think the mystery object was for? Was it for displaying plants? Was it a doll's house? Was it for transporting plants by boat? Or was it for pet insects? All of these sound like pretty valid ideas. We're getting votes for everything but the doll's house. They do not think it's a doll's house. Well done, it isn't a doll's house. Okay, but we are getting a majority there that are thinking it is for transporting plants on the long boat journey. Excellent thinking. Excellent thinking, everyone. In fact, we had a question from Miss Vegas's class in West Ryde, and they wanted to know, were the MacArthurs bringing in lots of plants? And of course they were. And when they did, they used Wardian cases. And it did, as Ada said, as Brianna said, it was used like a greenhouse because you could water the plants and then close that glass lid and it wouldn't waste too much of the fresh water on the long boat journey. So well done. Well done, all of you. Now, the other really interesting thing that Anita told us all about was about how they chose the plants for the garden here at Elizabeth Farm. So let's have a look at another poll. How did they do that to be authentic to what it was like 200 years ago? They wanted to plant what the MacArthurs planted to make sure the garden was authentic. You can see the poll now. How do Anita and the gardening team here at Sydney Living Museums decide what to plant in the kitchen garden?
Lots of good answers coming through.
Yes, a lot of you are great.
No one's falling for our trick questions, Naomi.
No, they're not.
That's good. They're all listening carefully.
I think Anita might want to do her favourite plants, but people don't think that's how we choose, and you're right. Of course, lots of people are voting. We have about 50% of you have voted already, and you're thinking it might be from historical sources like the many letters that they have in the State Library from Elizabeth MacArthur. And that is, of course, correct. They're really important historical sources, aren't they, Sophie?
They are really, really important. And actually, if you look on your screen now, you can see the letter that Anita was describing in the video. She was writing to her friend Eliza Kingdon. Now, her handwriting's a little bit tricky to read, but if you look carefully, you might be able to see some of the fruits that she's listing and describing about what's growing in her garden. Have a go at reading those words and then type what you can see into the Q&A. What kinds of fruits is Elizabeth describing to her friend Eliza? Who's good at reading a historical source? Historians have to do this too. It's pretty tricky.
It's often really hard. And in fact, Elizabeth MacArthur's handwriting's pretty good, isn't
Lot
it?
has spotted the oranges, which is good.
The cherries, the strawberries.
Bombardieri found the oranges.
Good work.
And raspberries, good. The cherries, you've spotted the cherries, excellent.
I can see Arden have seen the oranges, well done.
Okay, someone's seeing pears, yeah. A few more.
Miss Williams's class has found the raspberries. Janelle East has found the oranges, the cherries, the pears. Well done, what great answers.
Okay, fantastic everyone.
Pomona Public School have found peaches and cherries.
All right, so to plant crops and gardens like these ones that we're seeing described here and make room for animals like sheep and cattle and the homes as well, the settlers had to cut down many trees and clear the land. Now, the students at St Pius and West Ryde Public School emailed in a question. They'd like to know what happened to the Darug people after the MacArthurs built Elizabeth Farm. Now, the building of places like this one did actually displace the Darug people. So once their land was taken, they had to find new places to live or adapt to new ways of living. There was also resistance to settlers by some people as well, so like the warrior Pemulwuy, who was active in this area.
Now, we have another question for you that we want you to answer in the Q&A. How do you think the Burramattagal people felt when the MacArthur family built Elizabeth Farm? How do you think they felt? What do you think? Okay, oh, yep, we're getting sad. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, sad, and we're getting frustrated, maybe scared. Really good answers.
One mentioned they were sad because they chopped down some of the trees. That's very true. Yeah.
Wentworthville agrees, sad. Wentworthville Public School.
Nervous, that's a good suggestion.
Tayalgum also there is agreeing with these sorts of sentiments. Scared, nervous, confused, angry, they say. Oh, fantastic.
A lot of anger there, I think.
Yeah, St John's saying frustrated. Great answers. So, of course, I think you've all, exactly, depressed, confused, angry. Yeah, lots of good answers. And I think but despite these feelings and despite being dispossessed, we know from talking to people like Uncle Fred that the Darug people are still here today in Western Sydney and their culture is alive due to their resilience. So, in fact, good example is this artwork behind us by Kuku Yalanji artist Tony Albert. Now, Tony Albert's artwork is something we're going to talk to you a little bit more about. And Sophie is actually going to talk to Hayden. Now, Hayden works for Sydney Living Museums and he is our First Nations advisor. So he helps us talk to lots of different Aboriginal people so that we can share Aboriginal history, their Aboriginal history with everyone. So let's cross to that video now and talk to Hayden.
Elizabeth Farm is currently home to this artwork, Healing Land, Remembering Country by Aboriginal artist Tony Albert. This kind of artwork is called an installation artwork. Installations can help us to see a place in a new or different way. This artwork has been moved between different places with connections to colonial history and Aboriginal history. Here at Elizabeth Farm, it helps us to think about the MacArthur family, the Burramattagal, connections to country, and sustainability. Hayden, thanks for joining us today. What can you tell us about this artwork?
Well, as you can see behind me, it's a beautiful artwork, one that's made from a wooden structure and wooden framework with tables and chairs, as well as hand-woven baskets made from Indigenous plants. The artwork itself acts as a place of reflection, a place where you can come in to think about country, identity, and about the impacts on Indigenous people from colonisation. Visitors are then encouraged to take part in a special activity called a memory exchange.
Okay, so how does the activity actually work?
Well, we have paper which is embedded with seeds from plants called rushes, which are found along ponds and creeks. And visitors can write a thought, an idea, or a memory, or something that they learnt from their time here at Elizabeth Farm. You can then take that bit of paper and place it in one of the baskets behind me, and that basket acts as a vessel for remembering and healing.
So how does that activity connect to both country and sustainability?
Well, once they're placed in the baskets, they're then planted back into the ground, which then acts as rejuvenation for the land, to regenerate life for local plants and insects, and to create that cycle of healing.
Okay, what a great activity. Now, what memory or thought would you write on your seeded paper if you did that activity? Keep your thoughts in mind, because we're now going to go and find out how you can make your own seeded paper at home or at school. Okay, so here's what you need to make your own seeded paper at school or at home. First of all, we need some recycled paper torn up into thin, small scraps or strips like this. Oops, some of mine just blew away. Maybe do yours inside rather than outside. I've used some old gift wrapping paper here, but you can use whatever you have at home in your recycling box. So old cardboard boxes would work well, printer paper and things like that. You also need some water like this, and you pour that water into your torn up paper so it gets nice and soggy and can be used to turn into your seeded paper. You'll also need a mesh screen like this one here. We've used an old fly screen, but you can use any old sheet of mesh. You might have a picture frame at home you could use to make the frame. You can get creative with that one, but try and recycle things if you can. You also need a spoon and a sponge or cloth. And of course, you also need some native plant seeds. Today we're using some Australian native wildflowers, but you might choose something that's native to the area that you're in, that you know grows well in your gardens. Now here's what you need to do. Oh, you also need, before I forget, a blender. Very, very important not to forget the blender to turn your paper into pulp. So with the water, you add it to your shredded paper. So it's just covering it, then you leave it to soak overnight or at least for a few hours so it gets nice and wet. Then it goes into your blender, and that blends it up into a fine pulp like what I've made earlier. So there's still some water in there, but it's mostly finely shredded, pulpy paper. The next step is to spoon that onto the fly screen. So I'm going to take a few scoops, like so. It's a bit messy, so maybe put some towels down if you're inside. I'm just going to sort of dollop it on like this. I'm going to put it in roughly a rectangle or square, but it doesn't have to be perfect. Just do your best. Then I will use the spoon just to sort of smooth it out as much as I can like this. It sticks a little bit, but that does not matter at all. Next, I'll use my cloth or sponge to gently press down on the paper to soak up the extra water and also make it a little bit flatter. Let's see how it's going. Oh, it's sticking a little bit. That's no good. That's better on that side. Here we go. There we go. See how it's nice and flat now, and the extra water has been soaked up into my cloth. Next, I'll add a few of the seeds. So I'm going to sprinkle them on carefully, just with my bowl here, onto that wet paper, like this. I think that might be enough. Then I'm going to just use the back of my spoon just to press it a bit more into the paper. My fingertips sticks a little bit less. And that will get nice and stuck into our recycled paper. Now you have to leave that to dry for sometimes a few days. It can take a little while to dry, particularly in the cooler weather. If you've got a sunny spot to place it, that would be the best. Now, once it's dry, you can carefully peel it off the fly screen. And then, as you can see in this one that I made earlier, here it is coming up on screen soon. There we go. On one side, we have the seeds, but on the back is a nice smooth surface that you can write on to put on the message or memory that we talked about in the video you saw a few moments ago. Something you learned about today, or something about the country you're on, or just a nice personal memory for you. Then it's ready to be planted in your garden or perhaps in a pot if you haven't got a garden. And hopefully those seeds will grow. Now, sometimes gardening is pretty tricky, Naomi, and it might not grow on your first try, but just do your best and see how we go. It's always fun to try new things. And I hope you'll have a lot of fun with that activity.
Now, we do have time though for some of your questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A. We have about 5 minutes and we would love to answer your questions. So talk to your class and put that in now. So, of course, we do have a question here from Year 4 at West Ryde Public School, and they're wondering, why did it stop being used as a homestead? It's a really good question. Of course, we have got Michelle answering that question. She might type you an answer. But of course, the MacArthurs sold the house and sold it to other owners, and then in the end it's been sold to the New South Wales government. So now we all own this and it is being run as a museum. So no one actually lives here now, but you could all visit Elizabeth Farm someday. Soon.
Now, I can see a question here about the animals on the farm. Were there any animals? And of course, yes, there were. There were some like chickens that would support the family with eggs and meat and feathers for things like bedding. But there were also lots of sheep. John MacArthur was known for all the sheep and the wool that they produced. So many sheep filling the fields, so 1,000 football fields worth of paddocks had animals like those sheep in them.
Okay, so many questions.
What else have we got coming up?
Who grew the food? Well, that is a really good question. Here at Elizabeth Farm, of course, John and Elizabeth used a lot of convicts. They were here, of course, in the time when convicts were here from, you know, the early 1800s, and they had many, many convicts that would have done jobs like maintaining that kitchen garden that we saw, that of course would have been much bigger at the time the MacArthurs were here.
Now, there was a question about our seeded paper. How long will it take the seeds to grow? Now, that might depend on what kind of seeds you choose to put in your seeded paper. So have a look at the instructions, perhaps on the back of whatever seeds you decide to use. That should give you a guide of the best way and place to try and grow that. But hopefully it won't take too long if you water it and look after it carefully.
So one of the schools is saying what sort of seeds would be best? Well, Hayden chatted about the idea that it would be lovely to put back some native plants on land or in Darug land, if that's where you're from. So things like we mentioned, like the grevilleas or banksias or native flowers like Sophie mentioned, but it's your choice.
Yeah, it's great to put in something that's native to the area so that it will support the local wildlife like insects and bees and birds. So think carefully, maybe do a little bit of research about where you are and what grows well in that area, and you'll be able to find something that should hopefully really work well.
So were there many sheep on the farm? That's a good question, as Sophie
I don't know for sure. I think there were quite a lot. There's usually lots of sheep when you have a farm, but I think they started out small, but then the flock grew over time. They bred different kinds of sheep to try and get the very best wool, but I'm not an expert on sheep, I'm afraid, so might have to do a bit of research at home on that one.
But today at Elizabeth Farm, we don't have any animals left because there isn't enough land here in Parramatta. All right, what other questions?
So how did the MacArthurs earn money? Well, some of it did come from things like the sheep and the farm, yeah. No other way. He worked for the government as well, I believe, so.
Oh gosh, so we're looking at all your questions.
There's just so many coming through, it's hard to choose one to answer.
Well, we did have a question from West Ryde, and West Ryde said, why was it called Elizabeth Farm? It is a good question, and of course John MacArthur named this farm after his wife, and for many years John was back in England and Elizabeth ran the farm by herself, so she was a really important person in this farm running, so that worked out really well in the end. Did they have children that helped on the farm? They did have children, didn't they, Sophie?
They did have children.
But mostly the work on the farm would have been done by convict labour. They would have had at times more than 40 servants here on the farm helping out in the house and outside the house.
So let's see. How many plants are in the garden now? Well, there's quite a lot, and there's a combination of native plants in here, as well as some of the European plants. We saw a few of the ones in the kitchen garden, the vegetable garden, but I'm not sure how many there are altogether. I might have to ask Anita.
Yes, Anita might
ask
know.
her later for you. I'm not too sure, but there are lots and lots. And if you come here sometime on a weekend, if you live locally, you can always come and explore the house and gardens together and see the artwork, the installation more closely, and learn a little bit more about this place and the MacArthur family and its history. We'd love to see you here in person if you live nearby, or perhaps online again in one of our future virtual programs.
But I think that probably we are about out of time. So thank you for all the wonderful questions, and thank you to all our team at Sydney Living Museums. It's Karina and Colleen and Michelle, they're all answering your questions, so you could have a look at answered questions and see some of their answers to you. And thank you for coming. We hope we see you again at another virtual live event, or come to our regular virtual excursions. Check that out on Sydney Living Museum's website.
And have fun making your own seeded paper. All right, you can find the instructions, by the way, back online on our Plant Your History blog.
Thanks, everyone. See you
Bye.
later.